to the message together.
Hey, good morning. You know, it's interesting. Charlie mentioned how the attitude has changed in Cincinnati, and that really is true. I kind of have related it to like a really good Thanksgiving. You know, you're really excited to get together with family and friends and the food, and you had an incredible meal. I mean, the food was excellent. The dessert was fantastic. And then you went into a carb coma. You're laying on the couch, and occasionally Uncle Earl goes, and rolls over and wakes up just for a few seconds. And that's where I see Cincinnati is right now, getting ready for Christmas morning, which is next Sunday, which is the Super Bowl, right? And so let's just do it all together. Ready? A big Who Day. 1, 2, 3. Who Day. There you go. All right. Go Bengals. We got that out of the way. All right. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about choices and how important choices are for our lives. And there are all kinds of choices. And we need to remember that we are the sum total of the choices that we've made. Now, that's a basic statement, and you should know that, and it should be a no-brainer, but it's not. You have to remember that we are the total of the choices that we made, whether it was last week, a choice we made last month, 10 years ago. Those choices all combine to make up who we are today. And the choices that we're making today will determine who we become and what we can do tomorrow. Right? Not real rocket science here, is it? But yet we forget that. We forget that those choices are that important. Every single day, the choices that we make up who we are and what we become tomorrow. We talked about choices and choosing our purpose. Remember the little p purposes and the big P, the capital P, the lowercase p purposes are so important in our lives. And the longer we figure out these lowercase p purposes, the everyday purposes that we see, like God may want you talking to your neighbor or talking to your coworker or helping this person that you know that's in need. Those are the everyday lowercase p purposes. The more you do those, the more God will open up this opportunity to figure out your capital P purpose in your life. We talked about choosing those purposes. We talked about what happens when we live for people's approval, how it's really easy to miss God's purpose for our life, right? I mean, we want to fit in. We want people to like us. We want to be on the in crowd. We don't want to be an outcast. And so we do everything we can to try to live for people's approval around us. And when we do that, we might miss the purpose that God has for our lives, because we're only worried about what people think of us. We're not worried about who God is and what God wants for us. We talked about how many of us have control issues, whether it's at work or at home or with people in our lives. Should I let God handle this or should I handle it myself? And most of the time we're like, I'm going to handle this myself because I'm in control. And in reality, we're not in control of much, are we? We talked about choosing our pain, because there's going to be pain in our lives. It doesn't matter whether you want it to be there or not, it's going to be there. And so you get the opportunity to choose which pain that you want to come your way. Do you choose the pain of obeying your parents, or do you choose the pain of trying to figure out on yourself, all on your own, and go, oh man, this didn't work out. Now I'm in worse shape than I was before. I should have listened to my parents. By the way, if you're of that age, listen to your parents. It'll help your life in the long run, all right? And we talked about discipline. We talked about what it means between choosing what we want most and what we want now. And how just that pain of dedicating yourself and waiting for the bigger thing to happen in your life rather than giving in to the what I want now kind of moment will help you so much in the long run. Now, again, don't miss this. If you don't do something now about what you want most, that will become your greatest regret in life. And I talk to people every day that say, you know what, if only I had done this, if only I had made this choice, if only I had decided to do this, this, or this, instead of just waiting. And now because I've waited for the past 20 years and I've never done something about what I wanted most, now my life seems like it's stuck. It seems like I can't go anywhere. Last week we talked through how we have time for what we choose to have time for, right? What do you choose to have time for? What is it for you? We talked about how the fact that if somebody keeps saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to call you back, so sorry, I forgot to respond to your message, oh, so sorry, I forgot to do this for you. How about instead of saying, oh, I'm just sorry, I forgot, and how about saying, you're just not a priority to me? Hey, you want to go to lunch this week? Oh, you know what? I'm really busy this week. How about say, no, you're not priority enough for me to go to lunch with? And see how that changes the attitude of the people you're dealing with and your attitude of dealing with people. Because that's really what you're saying to them. How have these teachings impacted your everyday life over the past month, 5 weeks? Has anything changed for you? Have you reflected a little bit more? Have you thought about your choices a little bit more? Are you making better choices? Maybe because this has become like a refresher course in your mind. You know what? If you just show up to church on a Sunday morning, sing a few songs, and then sleep through the teaching, what good is that? I mean, you've checked it off your box, but what good is it? You need to come to church expecting God to do something in your life, expecting God to show up and help you make a better choice, a better decision, a new direction in your life. That's why you're really here, because you want God to show up for you. So you show up with that expectation in your life of God wanting to do something, of hearing God, of applying His teachings to your everyday life. Are you applying anything to your life? That's what today is all about. Some of our staff, we're going to look at how they've applied these teachings to their lives. You're going to hear from Tracy Mazzafari, one of our children's pastors, and Curtis McCullough, one of our student pastors, and Charlie Hines, our worship pastor, and Joel Reel, our Connect pastor, and see how every week of this teaching has impacted them and how they've applied that to their everyday lives. Now, first up is Tracy Mazzafari, and Tracy, again, is one of our children's pastors, and this is her first time speaking on a Sunday morning in front of a crowd. Will you give her like this warm welcome so she feels comfortable coming up on stage? Tracy?
Thank you guys so much. My name is Tracy Mazzafari, and I am the preschool coordinator in children's ministry right now. And I am nervous because normally I am with, littles. You guys are sitting down, so it does make you look a little smaller. That's a good thing. And if everybody will turn their listening ears on and put your hands in your lap, that will probably be perfect, because that's normally what I say to them every week. I actually loved this series, the whole series that we've been doing. It's been one of my favorite series, and honestly, every week I probably could have talked about anything. There have been so many topics I've related to each and every one of them, but the one that really hit me probably the most was the very first week when Scott talked about purpose, being blindsided, worrying about people liking you. Just everything that summed up pretty much the last year of my life. I was the administrator at Noah's Ark in Trenton, and I had worked there for 17 years, and I loved my job, and I loved the families, and I loved the relationships that I had. And it was a Christian child care center, so that was great, and I could talk about Jesus, I could pray with people, I knew my purpose. That was my purpose. And I poured myself into my work there, making sure parents were happy, making sure staff were happy, making sure kids were happy, and everything was taken care of. And I made sure everybody else was happy all the time. And I was so busy worrying about everything at work that I didn't even realize that I was not giving my family the good part of me. I was giving them the tired, stressed out, rundown version of me. And my husband, Mike, who is in service right now, he said all the time, I think you used all your niceness up at work today. He was right, because I wasn't really very nice to be around at times. But during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, our job became a lot more stressful. We had a lot of extra responsibilities, a lot of extra rules, a lot of extra cleaning, stress of keeping everybody else healthy, quarantine, shutdowns. We've all been through it. And we made it through that. We were back up and running after everybody was shut down for a few months. And we were called into a staff meeting in December of 2020 and told that we were good, things were tight, we'll be fine. And shortly after that, they told us we were closing permanently. So we had been in business for over 40 years. We were the only center in town. And we were pretty much in shock about the whole thing. But we knew we had a couple weeks to get things prepared, and we decided that we needed to let the parents know, let the staff know, all that good stuff, scheduled a meeting. And then they called us back in 15 minutes before the staff meeting and said, oh, by the way, we've changed the date. We're only going to be open for another week and a half. And I was mad, furious, honestly. Hurt, stressed, all the emotions. And since I was the administrator there, felt pretty responsible for all that, even though it wasn't my decision to do that. So felt horrible for days, focused on helping staff find jobs, focused on families finding care that quickly. The closer it got to closing our doors, I was physically, mentally exhausted, and I just chalked it all up to stress until I started running a fever. And then I found out I had COVID, and I wasn't even there the last week that we closed our center. So I had no closure, no goodbyes to staff, no goodbyes to the families, nothing. In fact, I went in there a couple weeks after we closed, cleaned out my office, walked the hallway, sat and cried, Felt like I had let everybody else down. Keyword, everybody else down. So I questioned God a lot then, because I couldn't understand why that would happen. And I didn't even know where to begin looking for another job. I'd been doing that job for 17 years. Didn't know if I wanted to stay in the child care field. Didn't know if I wanted to try something new. I'm not super young, so it was a struggle. And it was during that time that Randy actually reached out to me, and we were talking about what was going on, and we kind of tossed the idea around about opening possibly a center in Trenton with the church. And I was still hurt and wasn't sure if I wanted to go that route. So he told me to pray about it through the holidays, and he would do the same, and that's what we did. And God was already working, but I didn't see it. So I started thinking about a lot of things during that time. Realized, honestly, I hadn't been happy at my job for a while. There were signs that things weren't so good, and just overlooked it. My health wasn't good. I had ignored a lot of signs my body had been giving me for quite some time, and I ended up in the ER and having surgery. One of our children was going through some personal stuff that I hadn't really devoted the time to, and it was all because I wasn't focused on anything but worrying about what other people thought. And now that I was home, I definitely had to slow down, and I had to take care of myself and focus on important things. So during that time, I started spending more time in prayer and reading my Bible every day, which I wasn't doing before that. Started working on all those little lowercase p's that Scott talked about. And God showed me that I had to get over some stuff that I was going through, being bitter and angry with people. And before I could move on and figure out what I was going to do, I had to really start focusing on those smaller things. So I started asking God to use me and put me where he wanted me to be. And here I stand in front of you today, nervous, but I'm working with children, and I'm watching them love Jesus and teach them about loving Jesus, and that's where the focus needs to be. And I get to work with families again. And so I know that this is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do with me in the next year. Every year when our kids graduated at the daycare, we had a Bible verse that we taught them. It was the same one all the time, and it was perfect for today. So I'm just going to leave you with this. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future, and that's Jeremiah 29:11. And I'm super excited to see what God has planned for me, and I know that he has great things planned for you guys too.
Choosing what those purposes are for your life. Trusting that God has you. Not easy, is it? It just isn't. But how are you applying that to your life? Have you stepped back and take a look at who you are, where you are, why you're there? Have you honestly looked at how God has been providing for you in the middle of those moments, in the middle of that process, in the middle of trying to see those lowercase p purposes all around you? Are you reaching out and using your gifts and talents for those? Because they're there every single day. You saw how Tracy was struggling. Man, if you've lost a job recently, a job you've been at, a job you liked, a job you felt called to, and then all of a sudden your world is turned upside down, God's not done with you yet. But you have to choose to see how to let God open you up to those everyday lowercase p purposes around you so he can build you into the capital P purpose that he has for your life. Don't miss that. Now, Charlie is going to come and, actually, no, Kurt's going to come and talk about how this in control thing works with our everyday choices. Watch Kurt here.
When I was in BMT, basic military training for the Air Force, there were rules for just about everything, and they were always super strict rules. Anytime that you deviated from anything in the slightest bit, you'd be reprimanded. You'd have an MTI, military training instructor, screaming at you in your face. Your whole flight would have to go do push-ups. There was always something. But the scariest and strictest place to be in BMT, it might sound silly, but it's the cafeteria. And that's because there are so many rules there. We have rules on like how you have to walk in, how you pick up your food, how you sit down, how you eat your food, how you stand up, how you throw your food away, how you're walking out. There's rules for literally everything that you're doing inside of the cafeteria. And to make it even scarier, there's a place in the center of the cafeteria called the snake pit, which is aptly named because that's where all the MTIs will sit. And literally what they do the entire meal time is they just look across the cafeteria, watching for trainees who are trying to break these rules, whether they're talking at their table or walking wrong or doing something wrong. And when they find somebody that did something wrong, they all stand up and just start screaming at them and make them feel silly. And it was just a super stressful time. But I remember one lunchtime, we had chicken, and there's this one trainee who really wanted to have hot sauce with his chicken. And now we never had hot sauce in the lunch line. We always had like barbecue sauce and ketchup and whatnot. But this guy really wanted some hot sauce with his chicken. And he noticed on the table in the snake pit, there was this huge bottle of sriracha sauce. And he thought to himself, I want to go up and get some of that sriracha sauce for my chicken. And so he works himself up. He ends up standing up, walking over there. He's marching perfectly. He does all of his facing movements properly, goes up to the MTIs. He does his reporting statement flawlessly. And so far, he hasn't broken any rules. But at this point, the entire cafeteria is watching him because this isn't really something that people just do at BMT. And so the MTIs ask him, what do you want? And the trainee says, I'd like some sriracha sauce to go with my chicken, please. And we're all expecting this guy to just get screamed at and sent back to his table. But because he was following all the rules up to that point, the MTIs rewarded him gave him the bottle of sriracha sauce, sent him back, and he marched back perfectly. He got to eat sriracha sauce with his chicken that day, and we all thought it was super cool. And that story really came to mind when Shelley was talking about this choice of realizing who is in control. And to kind of drive the point home, two passages that she read stuck out to me. And the first one is in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." And then the second passage is Matthew 10, verse 16, that says, "Look, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves. So be as shrewd as snakes and as harmless as doves." Now, what I got out of those passages, this story that I just told, and Shelley's message was that God made us stewards. He gave us responsibility over a ton of things, but often we can kind of misconstrue that and forget that ultimately God is in control. While he has given us personally talents, ingenuity, and creativity to really make what we do our own, we still have to temper that and respect God in everything that we're doing. Following his guidelines and letting him work through us, that really allows the God-given talents that he provided us with to shine. Just like the trainee did with his hot sauce situation. Don't just do it your way, but be smart, but also be harmless. Use your talents and your personal ingenuity, but temper them through the commandments that Jesus points out as the two greatest ones, being love God with everything that you have and love the people around you like you love yourself. And this is how I live out that choice every day. God has made us responsible over a ton of stuff, but ultimately he is in control. And so in everything that I do, I have to temper it through his commandments.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I didn't do this at 9 o'clock. I am so proud of Curtis. Kurt grew up here at Community, doing great ministry. He is an incredible young man, and I'm so honored to have him on our staff in charge of our students. And if you have students, don't let them miss Kurt, because he's fantastic, phenomenal. But his story about the guy in the sriracha sauce, I mean, I've never been, if you've been in the military, you probably get that even more. I haven't, but I've watched a whole lot of military movies, so I kind of got a big picture idea of how that works. Understanding that you can do your part, but ultimately God's in control of what happens. You know, God's in control of what's going to come your way and what's going to happen, and your choice is to say, God, I'm going to attempt this. I'm going to try this because I believe it's your will for my life, and allow that to flow as your choices flow. And say, God, it's not for me to control this, but it's for me to trust you to control what's happening. Important choices for our lives. So how are you doing applying this theme and this topic of understanding that you're not the one in control, but God is? How's that working in your life right now? What needs to change in your life so you let God be in control and you step back and quit trying to control every scenario, every situation, because they can't be controlled by us. But God can. Let's listen to Charlie on this next part. Talk about how choosing your pain kind of works to God's plan for your life.
Good morning. So when I think about choices and how they define us, I think about how many times choices surrounding me have shaped who I am and where I am today. Often we are faced in life with two really bad options, two painful choices, and there's no good options. I'd like to look back, and I hope I would look back, and look at those decisions that I based my choices on, and look back and say, man, did they change my character? Did they have an impact on who I am going to become later on in life? I want my choice of pain to change me for the better. I want my choice of pain to set an example for those that know me as a follower of Christ. And I want my choice of pain to send a message that says the easy way is not always the best way. The least painful way is not always the way that changes us long term. It just postpones the journey. And it creates a need to walk through that same pain in a different setting later on in life. So when we think I skipped that one, I got away from that, or I avoided that, it just means God's got to bring that around again the next time. And then hopefully we'll learn that lesson and it'll change our character then. God is always more interested in our character than in our career. And for any of us that have invited Christ into our life as our Lord and Savior, we've invited him to change us. We've invited him to make us more like him. And because of that, and because he honors his word, he will pursue you through thick, through thin, through high water. He will pursue you because you gave him permission to do that. And so his commitment to you is, I will honor that for the rest of your life. And so I love that about God. But any of us who have invited him in, we've said that in those situations when we violate God's law or we steal from our employer, whether it's a ream of paper or whether it's we embezzle or whatever, we're basically telling God in that moment that, God, I'm not mature enough to grow in my character right now. So I'm going to take the easy way out. I'm going to lie. I'm going to obfuscate, whatever I need to do to get out of this situation because it's too painful. We're basically telling God, I'm not mature enough for you to address my character. So table that. We'll get back to it. I guarantee you, the next job that person has to face that same temptation. It might be greater, it might be less. But one of the things that Scott was talking about was just choosing your pain. And I shared that with a friend of mine who's in Texas, a pastor friend of mine, and he said, I've never heard about choosing pain before. And that really hit me differently. So I wanted to give you a couple examples of choosing the character-changing pain, the pain that may be harder at the time, but has a long-lasting changing effect. And my father's a great example of that. My hip failed when I was about 14 years old. He took me to the best doctors the military offered, Johns Hopkins, Walter Reed. Most of them offered a quick and easy option, but none of them were thinking long-term. None of them were thinking about the quality of life that I would have as I aged. And my father turned down a command to command all the military all the military police in the 7th Corps in Europe so that we could move to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, because he found a doctor there that was fully committed to rehabilitating my little 14, 15-year-old hip. And we did that. And we both knew it could have wrecked his military career, but he chose the good pain, the hard pain, the one that not only changed me, but it defined my character, but it also allowed me to see my dad's character. He was willing to set aside everything that he'd worked for in his life to put his family first, to put his son first, to put his family's health first. And that stuck with me. So now let me quickly explain what God does when you have made a decision to choose the hard pain. We ended up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I've said this once today, I am a Washington Commanders fan now that we have a name. But we found out that the Washington team had spring training camp in Carlisle. And Carlisle is like from here to like Skyline. That's it. You're like in one end of the military base, out the other end. Carlisle's done, like 2 miles. So it was really fun to be that close to the team that my whole family loved. But not only was there a silver lining for my dad, there was one for me too. I end up in the hospital. I can't play soccer, can't play sports anymore. So my friend came to the hospital to teach me how to play guitar. And it changed the whole trajectory of my life. So now you can fast forward 35 years, and I'm now a worship leader at a megachurch, and I'm forced to choose a pain as I realize I'm being asked to do things that to me violated how God made me to be a worship pastor. I would have ended up doing things on stage or whatever that I felt would have violated how God wanted me to worship. So I thought about leaving my job. I thought about losing 100% of my income overnight. I thought about possibly never leading worship again. But what I was driven back to was my character and my daughters. You see, my daughters were coming into their age. They're 20, almost 22 and 21, and they're coming into their age, but they've only seen their dad lead worship their whole life a certain way. And I talk a lot. I'm very vocal about why I believe this is the way we should worship, why I choose the songs I do, why I lead the way I do. And my kids had only seen that one example. And I thought, if I stay, I'm going to become an entertainment puppet. And my daughters will see me as a sellout, a shell of the authenticity that should be part of worship, and a shell of the transparency. And you know what? What scared me the most was that they would never be able to trust a worship pastor again in front of them. As worship is a huge part of me and my wife's lives, it's a huge part of our family, and my kids are no exception. My fear was that if I became what they were asking, that my daughters would never know if that person in front of them was leading them in worship of their Creator or just there to entertain them. So I did what I always do. One of my favorite scriptures is man makes his plans, but the Lord guides his steps. And so I left. I packed my office. I called my wife, come and get me. And I left. I left that job, and I leapt without a parachute. And on the way down, I'm like, God, please. And I'll talk about that later, not today. But that pain destroyed who I was, because no matter what, a little bit of what my job was somehow, no matter how careful I was, it still crept into my character. And I'm like, man, I think what bothered me the most is I felt like, how did that get in? How did I become something where I measured my worth before God and my family and the community based on how big the stage was or how many people were in front of me? And I was angry that seeped in, and I didn't even recognize it. And I was cautious. But, I say that because I chose the pain that shapes my character. Maybe hard at times, but it means growth happens. And then you and God can move on to bigger and better things. When I first got on staff here at Community, I think the record was 17 months set by the previous worship leaders, and they're like, you got to stay 17 months. And I was like, okay, but you had a guy named Eddie, right?
Yeah, Eddie was here about 8 years.
Yeah. I'm on 6. I'm going to crush that record. So I'm now in year 6. And here at Community, I found that, I'll just tell you real quick if I have just 30 extra seconds. I leapt without a parachute, and on the way down, I've always had a parachute, and I landed safely somewhere. Different job, different church. And this time I hit the ground at 100 miles an hour, and I splattered into a million pieces and was buried 6 feet under. But little by little, stuff started to grow up in the ground around where I hit ground zero. And what was growing up were the desires of my heart. And I didn't realize what I loved and how passionate I was about those things until they were all gone. And then God broke me like a seed, and stuff started to grow up. And here I am now, 6 years at Community, and I'm able to play a part in influencing future generations of worship leaders, because Community Christian Church, this church here, allows young leaders like Noah, Trey Key, you've seen Trey, Tamara on guitar, and even some of the other members of our band, Jamie and Jackie. They allow these people to grow in their gifting, lead you all, and sometimes fail miserably. But they fail in a room full of grace-filled people that they call family. But what I'm most grateful for today is that my daughters can still tell the difference between being led in worship and being entertained in worship. And I can only hope that my family and my friends, having a front row seat to that choice, to those choices that I had to make, will also choose similar paths. They'll take the hard pain, the pain that shapes your character, that leaves a legacy for your family and preserves who you are in your walk with Christ. And so my encouragement to you is choose wisely because future generations are depending on you. Thank you.
Let me ask you something. Choosing the pain. Understand, Charlie left a job that was the premier job in the entire United States. It was the top of the top. One of the largest churches in the United States as the lead worship pastor of that church. And he chose the pain of being out of an environment that was not healthy for him. Choosing, I don't know, God, where you want me, but I'm going to leap and trust that you have me. That's pain-filled. Not many of us would do that. Not many of us would take a job that we've wanted our entire lives and that we had and chose to leave that because it wasn't right where God wanted you. That's choosing pain. Where are you in your life when it comes to the choices that you have to make? Are you willing to choose the hard things over the easy things? Are you willing to choose the right things over the things that may not be right for you? Are you willing to take that step? Because it's not easy. But God says, make this choice and I'll provide a path for you. Now, next up is Joel. And Joel's going to be talking about choosing what's most important over just what we want in our life. Listen to Joel.
So the final week of the teaching was choosing what's most important. And what's really interesting about all that is that so many of us can easily identify what's most important, but making that choice to follow those top priorities is a completely different decision, isn't it? Knowing what's important and choosing on a daily basis. And that requires the discipline. It requires the discipline of making primary things actually top priority over secondary worries and concerns. It requires us to be disciplined to know and to follow what our capital P purpose is over the things that are just urgent at the moment. And that's hard. That can really change our daily basis. That can change what we think about and what we want to do. So when Scott was teaching last week, and he said, you have to put the most important things first. Man, that really hit me. That really stings true because like a lot of Christ followers, I know that I have to give God some of the first fruits of my morning. Like I want to give God time in the morning. Now, I guess not for everybody, it has to be in the morning, but I'm telling you, I think it's best. I know it's best for me. And so, man, I'm like everybody else too. In the morning, what's the first thing you do when you wake up? You look at your phone. You check what you missed when you were asleep for those 6 hours, 7 hours, right? And we can easily become a slave to those red numbers in the corner of apps. And we just follow those until they dry up, and then we're like, all right, well, what do we do now? For me, it can easily then turn into weeding out my inbox, and then I'm straight into the workday. And I'm telling you, on almost a weekly basis, 1 or 2 days out of every single week, I will stop myself 10, 15, 30, sometimes even an hour into my workday and be like, hold on a second, Joel. You are actually blessed to be doing a ministry job, and you have not given God direct time and access to your heart and your mind. And I will have to put things on pause and be like, oh gosh, how can I do this? And I'll go and I'll hit up my prayer journal. I'll do my devotional reading. I'll have Bible in a year plan. I got a workbook me and my discipleship group is going to, and I like to kind of mix it up there on a daily basis. So man, it's got to be a priority for me. I'm being honest with you, I struggle with it just like everybody else. If I can hit 6 out of 7 days a week of giving God time in the morning, and then also hopefully not just limiting God to only those minutes, but man, if I can start off like that, that's pretty good. Just way too often, the pattern of, man, okay, my time with God has slipped. Now a little bit of time passed, and parts of my relationship with God are far apart and feel distant. And then all of a sudden, I look at myself and I'm in some sort of minor crisis or major crisis, and I am paying for it. The pain of regret and thinking, geez, Joel, how could you not have put the top things that you say are in your life given them first priority in your life? How can you do it? And that's how it happens for me. When Scott was preaching, the words of Jesus about some of the most important things popped into my head when Jesus is quoted in Mark chapter 8, is saying, "What would it benefit you if you gained the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?" I mean, it seems like an easy question. Is anything worth more than your soul? If I went around and took a census of, all right, what's your top priority, and would you trade anything for that? I mean, that's an easy question to just fill in and say, no. No, it's not. But then you got to ask yourself, man, are my attitudes and actions, are they backing that up? Is my time spent backing up what I'm saying is top priority in my life? It's so much easier said than done. And that's why Eugene Peterson translates some of the verses even before that question that Jesus has in the Message version of Mark chapter 8. He says, calling to the crowds to join his disciples, Jesus said, "Anyone who intends to come to me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat, I am. Don't run from suffering, embrace it. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way to saving yourself, your true self. What good would it do to get everything that you want and lose you, the real you? What could you ever trade for your soul?" And man, when you really boil it down like that, I feel like that is a good question. Man, what would it take for us to say, man, these are the most important things. I'm going to make sure, I'm going to examine my daily routines, my weekly routines. I'm going to examine it and say, this is it. This is what's got to be top priority, and so I'm going to rearrange some stuff. Because if I just ask myself, Joel, if what you say is the most important things, if Jesus followed me around, would he be able to guess at it without me telling him? Would he for you? I saw something that kind of tickled me on Facebook. Somebody posted that church should be your excuse for missing everything else. And while I don't necessarily agree with all the other sentiments maybe that might push forward, I do love that got me thinking, that reversal of thinking that hey, yeah, actually, I got to make sure that I'm not just ceding my time and my efforts to whatever pops up or to whatever might seem important for that week, but I want to have a whole picture of my life and what I say is important, and I want to be able to point out these are the things that I'm doing. This is how I am showing that these are the most important things in my life. Because Scott also used the quote that if Satan can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. And that's true. And I think it's probably true for you guys too, that Satan's not going to be able to convince you to renounce your faith. He's not going to get you to completely walk away from your family. So the next strategy is just to get you to forget about it, to get you to jumble your priorities, to get you to be forced into dealing with things constantly that get you to just spread yourself so thin that your top priorities and the things that you don't think are quite as important are actually on the same level in your world. And this is why we got to ask ourselves, man, does my time spent, does my actions, do the direction of my heart accurately represent what is absolutely most important to me? Can you easily tell without anybody having to list it out? Would they be able to tell what is most important to you? Because the great thing about being able to talk about choices in church, and the great thing about this whole series is that, man, God has given us the opportunity and the freedom to choose what we want, and he wants us to want him. And that's got to be represented in what we do and what we say and what our daily lives look like in the decisions that we make. And that's why we got to know from week one that we need to know what our purpose is. You got to know what your capital P purposes are, what you're called to, what you're gifted at. You need to know what you're in control of, and also, as equally important, you need to know and recognize what you're not in control of. And we got to make sure that we're choosing pain, the right pain in our life. We need to choose the pain of discipline instead of facing the pain of regret. And finally, this last week, man, we've got to choose what's most important. And we got to make that part of our daily disciplines so that what is most important stays on top. God, we are just so grateful that you have given us these gifts, that you've given us the opportunity to encourage each other, to read from your word and be encouraged by it, and also just to know and see what other people struggle with and how other people apply your word, God. May you not let us forego that gift either. But Jesus, we just thank you for choosing us first, that we only have the opportunity at this incredible love and joy-filled life because of the sacrifices that you made for us. And so, God, we want to give you our lives more and more fully. God, would you help us to do that through the power of your Son, Jesus? We thank you for him. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.